Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. Today we have another History Club channel video. Today we're going to be looking at World War One. We're going to be looking at it from a slightly different perspective, though, because usually when we're talking about World War One, I think we're focusing on military perspectives. We're thinking, which country won, which nation had the most manpower, air power, navy, how it impacted military powers, right? But in a lot of cases, wars more often are detrimental to civilians as well, because civilians are family members to soldiers. They're also going through the economic and societal breakdown that is followed by a war and is devastated by the social upheaval that is present during wars. And so we're going to be looking at World War One, often referred to as the Great War, and how it impacted civilians. Okay, so what was World War One? So World War One started in 1914, ended in 1918, resulted in approximately 30 million casualties, with 10 million killed and 20 million wounded. And this is just a huge amount. I think numbers and statistics become it's at some point it becomes incomprehensible, because 1,000 we see, 10,000 we see, 100,000, a million, 10 million. It's something beyond our understanding. It is a horrendous tragedy that I think serves us as presents us a responsibility to continue to learn about and in order to prevent another war from occurring like this. But while much of the focus remains on military strategies and battlefield events and political consequences, the experiences of individuals, of civilians who endured the economic hardships and the displacement and psychological trauma just aren't as prevalent and in discussions today. And I thought understanding the war's impact on everyday people provides us a more comprehensive view and understanding of the global conflicts and how it shapes societies and really altered the course of the whole 20th and 21st century. Yeah, so let's look into more of the background of the war. Why did the war occur? Well, the war was between the Allied powers, including Britain, France, Russia, the United States, Italy, Serbia, Portugal, Belgium, and Japan, and against the Central Powers, who were Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, and a lot of different countries. And while the primary battlegrounds were in Europe, the conflict also had a global impact, having civilian impact in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And the war was largely trench warfare, where both sides dug very deep defensive fortifications that led to very prolonged battles, with little territorial gain and horrific living conditions. And the land between the two narrow trenches are often called the no man's land, and devastatingly huge numbers of people died in attempts from the army officially and both unofficially to try to cross the no man's land. It was huge. It's a devastating war. You see some graphic images pretty easily of World War One. It is a tragedy that just cannot be expressed. There are certain tragedies like that just are incomprehensible to a lot of modern day students that are very heartbreaking, very traumatic, that are nevertheless necessary to understand. Yeah, but beyond the battlefield, the war was profoundly altering the lives of citizens, with towns and cities devastated by these artilleries and blockades and widespread starvation from all these weaponry. Mass displacements occurred, and it forced millions of refugees. It killed civilian populations from suffering, often caught in the war and the crossfire, and they just didn't have any control over it. Although soldiers were on the front lines, civilians bore the brunt of the war, I would say. Cities and villages suffered from destruction, food shortages, and loss of life. When all the workers are off to war, it's just entire communities were displaced, and families just lost their primary breadwinners, and the war's impact on civilians were just it can be looked at from several lenses in terms of economy, in terms of society, and displacement, and in terms of psychological trauma that they faced. All these different ideas are significant. Let's look into economy first of all. So the economic strain of World War One, I think, is very famous. It was devastating. It affected civilians at every single level, and European economies suffered immensely due to war expenditures, loss of trade, destruction of infrastructure, and conscription of the labor force. And yeah, and the cost of the war also depleted the national treasuries and all the resources within a country, and it forced a lot of governments to impose higher taxes in order to make up for the lost expenses. It just borrowed extensively, and this all caused pressure on civilians and their daily lives. And this most famously resulted in inflation, a massive devaluation of currency, particularly in Germany, and severe economic instability. And so if you see images like this, for example, you see save the wheat and help the fleet, eat less bread. And so this economic concern also coupled with food scarcity, with millions of men in military service, agricultural production were dropping, farms were just left unattended, and they were also brutalized by the war when it became battleground. And yeah, food shortages became a pressing matter, but governments introduced like new system that limited the amount of bread, meat, other essential civilian food that needed distribution, and families were forced to make difficult choices about food and survival. And in the midst of this, continued propaganda by many countries: save the wheat and help the fleet, eat less bread, don't waste bread, save 2 thick slices every day, and defeat the U-boat. And so this kind of sacrifice on behalf of the civilians in terms of economy, very heartbreaking to see, was a significant impact of economy. And I included it here in this slideshow, but the war must be looked at from an economic perspective, because wars are not just on the battlefield. It is not, I gained all this territory, now it's mine, the war is over, I won indefinitely, and you are the losers. It is just not like that, because there are economic winners who were able to stabilize their economy during the war. Countries like Brazil, I believe, they were able to use transports and exports during the war in order to gain all the necessary trade material that they needed. And all these economic winners and losers, just like there were military winners and losers. And yeah, as much as we focus on economy, we just cannot we just cannot ignore the impact it had on at home, because millions of civilians found themselves living under military occupation, and especially in Belgium, France, German forces were imposing martial law and confiscating food supplies, using forced laborers, and entire towns deported, civilians executed and sent to prison camps. Continued stories of occupation and atrocities. This just continued, and I think in a lot of cases these atrocity also continued military engagements, because people were so angry that German forces were doing this. They were like, we gotta fight more. And so there was this constant cycle of atrocities occurring over and over again. And especially in the Ottoman Empire, there was the Armenian genocide from 1915 to 1917, with approximately 1.5 million Armenian deaths, who were targeted through mass deportations, forced marches, and massacres. And other minority groups, we had the Assyrians and the Greeks. They also faced similar persecutions, and these events really marked one of the earliest instances of modern genocide. And so these psychological scars with millions of women widowed and children orphaned, millions of lost loved ones, and the constant fear of bombing, starving, invasion. It was just so much significant trauma. I think many civilians experienced PTSD, what is now known, but which at the time was little understood and untreated. And so, for those in defeated nations like Germany, Austria Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, the war also brought humiliation and despair. And especially Germany, burdened with the Treaty of Versailles were just they were severely lacking territory. Had a bunch of military restrictions, had to bear severe reparations, and this post-war instability really contributed to the extremism that gave rise to Hitler's regime. Yeah. I also want to add, just as something during the economy, that women also began to enter the workforce in unprecedented numbers, with men all off in the military. They worked in factories. They were producing weapons and ammunition, and they took up jobs in transportation, agriculture, served for nurses, and yeah, it just gave women greater independence, greater financial autonomy. Also, exposed them to a lot of difficult working conditions, however, very long hours, minimal pay, and so the war accelerated the push for more women's right, but it also came at a great cost as well. And so, yeah, and men also in the battlefield, they were just facing dire food crisis even outside of the war. Civilians, especially in Germany, were eating like turnips. They were eating sawdust-based bread, and it was just like the constant threat of and malnutrition was causing high mortality rates and widespread diseases, and all these brutalities just cannot be underspoken. And in countries like Britain, for example, where German had air raids all across London and other key cities, just aerial warfare caused lots of death. We also have northern France bearing the kind of brunt of the trench warfare, for example. The toil of not knowing when this war is going to end, when they're going to come in attacking you. And Russia also facing the political revolution in their own way, having protests, strikes, a lot of social instability, and also significant food shortages. The United States also having the Spanish flu pandemic during the time, and troops and poor sanitary conditions contributing to the spread of diseases. And so, yeah, the World War I's impact on civilians was it's just huge, cannot be underestimated. Beyond the battlefields, the war transformed economies, it changed gender roles, devastated communities, left scars to families and communities. It also reshaped international politics and contributed to the rise of nationalistic movements, which gave groundwork for future conflicts, as we will see in World War II. And so for civilians, the war was not just a distant conflict fought by soldiers. It was really an all-consuming event that redefined their daily life. It forced people to adapt and to endure and suffer immense losses. And the lessons from their experiences continue to be relevant today. It serves as a reminder, I think, for all of us of the human cost that is in global conflict, and our necessity in preventing another one from occurring. And yeah, and it's a very heavy topic, and I hope that through understanding these kind of ideas, you're better able to appreciate the peacetime efforts that are kept up today. Lament all the warfare that is happening right now, all the violence that is occurring, and take on the responsibility of finding ways to prevent such occurrences from continuing. And I think it is our responsibility as global citizens to work in preventing atrocities, to champion peace and love all across the universe. And yeah, and that's my message for today. It's a very heavy topic, and I thank you so much for staying with me. I hope that you'll continue to learn, continue to stay curious, and think about these ideas. And yeah, just continue to seek ideas on your own. Think and engage in communities in order to work in these areas. Thank you so much, and bye.